We didn't think anything was wrong at first. No one was rude. No one raised their voice. And yet, something followed us home that night. We are an interracial couple living in the United States. A white man and a black woman, sharing an ordinary life. Work, groceries, dinners with friends, weekends that look like everyone else's. From the outside, we blend into the background of a society that insists it has moved on. This series is not about loud hatred or obvious cruelty. It's about what happens in the pauses, in the smiles that linger too long, in the questions that sound polite but land heavy, in the moments where nothing is said, yet everything is felt. These are stories told from the inside, quietly, honestly, not to accuse, not to teach, but to recognize something many people live and rarely name. They smiled before asking. That's what made it hard to answer without feeling like I was the problem. It was a small gathering, the kind we had attended dozens of times before. Nothing formal, just people sitting around a wooden table, glasses half full, music low enough to allow conversation, but loud enough to hide discomfort if it appeared. We had arrived together, as always. I carried the food. She greeted everyone with that calm warmth people often noticed before anything else about her. From the outside, we looked ordinary. A white man and a black woman, holding hands, moving through a space that insisted it had already figured itself out. At first, everything flowed easily. The talk stayed on safe ground. Work, travel plans, a recent movie. People laughed at the right moments. No one stared. No one said anything overt. And yet, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that comes before something shifts. Someone leaned forward slightly, resting their elbow on the table, smiling as if they were about to say something kind. So, how did you two meet? The question itself wasn't unusual. We'd heard it many times, but the tone carried something extra. A curiosity that lingered just a second longer than necessary. My partner answered politely, her voice steady, practiced without sounding rehearsed. She told the story simply, the way we always did. There was a brief pause after she finished. Not awkward enough to call out, just long enough to notice. "Oh," the person said. "I wouldn't have guessed." Everyone smiled again. So did we. That was the first moment of the night. The first small crack. Nothing worth pointing at. Nothing you could quote later without sounding sensitive. But it stayed with us. As the evening went on, conversations branched off. At one point, we found ourselves at opposite ends of the table. I noticed how people addressed her first, how their eyes searched her face before moving to mine, as if trying to place her somewhere that made sense to them. Not hostile, just evaluative. Later, someone joked about neighborhoods changing for the better. The room laughed softly. My partner didn't. Neither did I. We exchanged a glance, brief, almost imperceptible. A silent acknowledgement that didn't need words. We didn't say anything. We never did, at least not right away. On the drive home, the car was quiet. Streetlights passed over the windshield in slow, rhythmic flashes. I waited, unsure if I should speak first. Finally, she exhaled. "Did you notice how quiet it got after that joke?" I nodded. I did. That was all we said about it. Not because there wasn't more to say, but because we both knew this wasn't new. It was just another entry in a growing list of moments that felt too small to confront and too heavy to ignore. Another time, it happened at a restaurant. A casual lunch. The server addressed me almost exclusively, even after my partner spoke directly to them. It wasn't aggressive, just habitual. I watched her shoulders tense slightly, the way they always did when she decided whether to correct someone or let it pass. She let it pass. Later, when the check came, the server smiled and said, "You're such a lucky guy." Again, everyone smiled. Again, nothing was said. That night, she asked me something quietly while we washed dishes together. "Do you ever feel like I have to be smaller so things stay comfortable?" I didn't answer right away. I had never lived inside her experience, but I had watched her carry it, carefully, constantly adjusting, softening, translating herself so others wouldn't feel challenged by her presence. I think, I said slowly, you've been asked to make yourself smaller long before we met. She nodded, and that silence stayed between us for a long time. At work events, people complimented her in ways that felt slightly off. You're so articulate. You don't fit the stereotype. Words offered as praise, landing like quiet reminders of expectations she never agreed to carry. Once, someone asked where she was really from. She answered patiently. They asked again. I felt anger rise in my throat, sharp and useless. She touched my arm under the table, a subtle signal to let it go. Later, she told me, I'm tired of proving I belong in places I was already invited into. That was the night something shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly. We didn't argue about it. That was the problem. Instead, we both realized we had been spending years explaining ourselves, our choices, our relationship, our existence, to make others comfortable. So we stopped. Not all at once, but slowly, intentionally. When someone made a joke that relied on assumptions, we didn't laugh. When questions crossed into territory that felt invasive, we answered briefly, or not at all. When politeness turned into a wall, we stopped trying to climb it. And something unexpected happened. Some people grew distant. Invitations became less frequent. Conversations stayed shallow. Others adjusted, learning where the lines were once they were no longer invisible. We didn't label anyone. We didn't accuse. We simply paid attention to who could exist with us without needing us to shrink. One evening, after another gathering, she said something that stayed with me. I don't need everyone to understand us. I just need us to understand each other. That became our anchor. There were moments of loss in that decision. Comfort, ease, a certain illusion of belonging. But there was also relief. A quiet strength that came from no longer negotiating our reality. Now when someone smiles before asking, we notice. When silence follows a comment, we feel it. When politeness hides discomfort, we recognize it. We don't rush to explain anymore. Not because we're closed, but because we've learned that some explanations are never really listened to. Nothing dramatic happened. We just stopped explaining. And in that choice, we found something steadier than approval. Each other. Sometimes I wonder how many other couples are having the same quiet conversations on their way home. How many people feel that tightening in their chest, but don't yet have words for it. This story doesn't end with resolution. It doesn't end with confrontation or applause. It ends where most real stories do. Mid-thought, mid-feeling, with the sense that something has shifted, even if the world around us insists it hasn't. And maybe that's enough for now. Because once you start noticing these moments, you can't unsee them. And once you stop explaining yourself, you begin to hear something else instead. Silence. Not the kind that erases you, the kind that finally belongs to you. No one disagreed with us. They just stopped talking. It happened at a dinner table we knew well. The same house, the same long wooden table, the same chairs that had held years of conversations, laughter, and familiar stories. We had been there before, many times. Nothing about that evening felt new when we arrived. She brought dessert. I brought a bottle of wine. We greeted everyone the way we always did. Hugs, smiles, casual warmth. If someone had taken a picture at that moment, it would have looked like any other gathering. Comfortable, normal, safe. At first it was. The conversation drifted easily. Work complaints, a neighbor's renovation, someone's upcoming vacation. We listened, laughed in the right places, added small comments when they fit. I noticed, as I often did, how people oriented their bodies slightly toward me when they spoke, even when the subject came from her. It wasn't intentional. At least I don't think it was. Just habit. She didn't seem bothered. Or maybe she was used to it. Dinner was served. Plates passed from hand to hand. Forks scraped lightly against ceramic. The rhythm of eating filled the spaces between sentences. Everything felt calm enough that I almost relaxed. Then someone mentioned schools. It was casual, a comment about how hard it is to choose the right environment for kids. Another person chimed in, talking about neighborhoods, property values, and how some areas were changing fast. They said it lightly, almost thoughtfully. "I guess you have to be careful where you settle," someone added. "You want to make sure your kids grow up around the right influences." There it was. Not a statement you could challenge outright. No harsh words, no raised voices. Just a sentence floating in the air, wrapped in concern and practicality. I felt her pause beside me. She didn't speak immediately. Neither did I. The room stayed quiet for a moment longer than usual, as if everyone sensed something had landed but wasn't sure what to do with it. "What do you mean by that?" she asked finally, her voice even. Not confrontational. Curious almost. The question was gentle. Too gentle, maybe. The person smiled, lifting their hand slightly, as if to soften what came next. "Oh, just different values, different priorities." No one nodded, no one disagreed. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was polite, carefully neutral. Plates were adjusted. Someone took a sip of wine. Another person cleared their throat. I waited for someone, anyone, to add something that would loosen the moment, to challenge the implication or redirect the conversation. But no one did. And that was when I understood. The silence was the response. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the urge to speak, to say something that would balance the room, pressed against the back of my teeth. But I hesitated. I always did. Not because I didn't care, but because I was still learning when my voice helped, and when it accidentally took space away from hers. She didn't push further. She nodded slowly, as if filing the moment away. "Right," she said. "Values matter." The conversation moved on after that, but it didn't return to where it had been. It stayed lighter, safer. Stories without edges, comments without weight. No one looked directly at her for a while. On the drive home, the car filled with the low hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of passing traffic. She stared out the window, her reflection faint against the dark glass. "That wasn't about schools," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. What I didn't say was how familiar the moment felt. How often I had watched conversations like that happen around her. Statements carefully shaped to avoid sounding offensive while still carrying assumptions that never needed to be explained. "What bothered me," she continued, "wasn't what they said. It was that no one said anything else." I nodded again. There was nothing to argue with in that. At home, we washed dishes together in silence. The clink of plates against the sink felt louder than usual. When we finished, she leaned against the counter, crossing her arms loosely. "Do you ever notice," she asked, "how quickly people go quiet when the conversation gets too close to race, even if no one says the word?" I thought about it. About how often discomfort disguised itself as politeness. About how silence could protect the person speaking while isolating the person being spoken about. "Yes," I said. "I notice." She exhaled slowly. "It makes you feel like you imagined it. Like maybe you're reading too much into things." I had heard her say versions of that before. The doubt that crept in not because the moment was unclear, but because it was subtle enough to deny. A few days later, it happened again. Different setting. Same pattern. This time, it was a work-related dinner. People we didn't know as well. Conversation stayed professional. Careful. Someone asked how long we'd been together. Another person commented on how interesting our dynamic was. Interesting. The word hovered there, vague and unchallenged. She smiled politely. I did too. The conversation shifted, but I noticed how the energy changed again. Not colder, just more distant. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, she sat on the edge of the mattress, quiet. "I'm tired," she said finally. Not physically, just tired of carrying these moments home with me. I sat beside her. You don't have to carry them alone. She looked at me then. Really looked. I know. But sometimes it feels like if I name them out loud, I become the problem. That stayed with me. Because I had seen it happen. Not to us, but to others. The moment someone points out discomfort, they're suddenly framed as sensitive, divisive, difficult. The silence before that protects everyone else. Weeks later, we were back at that same dinner table. Same house, same chairs. The conversation followed familiar tracks again. But something was different this time. When someone made a comment that brushed against those same assumptions, she didn't ask a question. She simply said, calmly, that kind of language can mean different things to different people. The room went quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. Someone nodded slowly. Another person shifted in their seat. A third cleared their throat and added, yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. It wasn't dramatic. No apologies, no confrontation. Just a small adjustment. On the way home, she smiled faintly. Did you feel that? I did. It wasn't perfect, she said, but it was something. That was when I realized the silence itself wasn't the enemy. It was who the silence served. Some silences erased, others made space. We were learning to tell the difference. This story doesn't end with clarity or comfort. It ends where many of ours do, somewhere in the middle. A place where we are still paying attention, still choosing when to speak, and when to let quiet settle. Because once you start noticing what silence protects, you can't ignore it anymore. And sometimes, the most important thing isn't breaking the silence. It's refusing to let it swallow you. They said it like a compliment. That's what made it harder to respond without sounding ungrateful. It happened on a weekday afternoon, the kind that feels interchangeable with so many others. We had stopped at a small cafe near our apartment, a place we liked because no one rushed you out. Soft music, neutral walls, sunlight cutting through the windows at an angle that made everything look calmer than it was. We ordered our drinks and stood to the side, waiting. The barista smiled at her first, a warm, practiced smile. Your hair is amazing, she said, leaning slightly over the counter. I mean, wow. My partner thanked her politely. She always did. Then the barista tilted her head, still smiling. You don't look like what I expected. There it was. Not rude, not loud, not meant to wound. Just a sentence that opened a door no one had asked to walk through. My partner blinked once. Oh? She said. Yeah, the barista continued, clearly unaware of the shift she'd caused. I don't know. You just seem different. Different from what? I wondered. I watched my partner's expression change in a way I had learned to recognize over time. Not anger, not surprise, more like calculation. A quick internal decision about how much energy the moment deserved. She smiled again. Different can mean a lot of things. The barista laughed lightly. I mean it in a good way. Of course she did. We took our drinks and moved to a small table by the window. Outside, people walked past with headphones in, wrapped in their own afternoons. Inside, the cafe hummed with low conversation. She stirred her drink slowly, the spoon tapping gently against the cup. Do you ever notice how different is never neutral? I nodded. It's always relative to something. She glanced at me, and the something is usually unstated. We sat there for a moment, neither of us drinking. The comment replayed in my head, not because it was shocking, but because of how familiar it sounded. How many times I had heard versions of it aimed at her, each one framed as admiration. You're so well-spoken. You're not what I imagined. You're surprisingly calm. Words that sound like praise, but quietly outline expectations she never agreed to meet. Later that week, we attended a work function of mine. One of those events where everyone wears their best professional self, smiles a little longer than usual, and keeps conversations just personal enough to seem warm. I introduced her to a colleague I'd known for years. He shook my hand firmly, then hers. his grip slightly hesitant. "So you're the one," he said with a grin. "I've heard a lot about you." She smiled. "All good things, I hope." "Absolutely," he replied. Then, without pausing, "You're not what I pictured." The sentence landed heavier this time. She tilted her head. "What did you picture?" He hesitated, laughing awkwardly. "Oh, just different." Again, I felt my jaw tighten. This time I spoke. Different how? He looked between us, realizing too late that he had stepped somewhere uncertain. "I just meant, I don't know. Forget it." The moment passed, technically, but something stayed behind. On the drive home, she was quiet. I didn't rush to fill the space. I had learned that sometimes silence was where her thoughts needed room. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked finally. She shrugged lightly. "It's not about this one thing. It's about how often people feel entitled to tell me who they expected me to be." That word, entitled, hung between us. She continued, her voice steady but tired. "It's like they build a version of me before we even meet. And when I don't match it, they feel the need to comment." I thought about how rarely anyone said that to me. How often I was allowed to simply be what I was without explanation or surprise. "I'm sorry," I said. It felt inadequate, but it was honest. She nodded. "I know you are, and I know you see it. That helps." A few days later, it happened again. Different place, same pattern. We were at a friend of a friend's apartment. Someone we barely knew complimented her outfit, then added, "You're so put together. I wouldn't have guessed." She smiled politely, but I could tell her patience was thinning. "Guessed what?" she asked. The woman laughed nervously. "Nothing. I just mean, people assume things." "Yes," my partner replied calmly. "They do." The conversation shifted quickly after that, but the air had changed. Subtle, almost imperceptible. Still, I felt it. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, she stood in front of the mirror, removing her earrings slowly. "I'm tired of being a surprise," she said softly. I met her eyes in the reflection. "You're not." She smiled faintly. "I know, but sometimes it feels like the world keeps expecting a version of me that exists only in their head." I didn't have a solution. I didn't try to offer one. I had learned that this wasn't something to be fixed with reassurance. Instead, I said, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for who you are." She turned to me then. "I'm starting to believe that." That night, lying in bed, I thought about how many times those comments had passed unnoticed by others. How easily they blended into everyday conversation. How harmless they could seem to someone who had never been defined by expectation before being known. I also thought about how she was changing. Not becoming harder, just clearer. Less willing to soften herself to fit someone else's mental picture. This story doesn't end with confrontation. No dramatic speech, no sudden awakening. It ends with something quieter. The next time someone says, "You don't look like what I expected," she doesn't rush to reassure them. She lets the silence sit, long enough for the discomfort to belong where it started. And each time that happens, I realize something else is shifting too. Not the world, not yet, but us. And sometimes, that's where real change begins. They always looked at her first, even when they were speaking to me. It was something I noticed early on, but only later understood. At first, I thought it was coincidence, or politeness, or maybe my imagination trying to find patterns where none existed. But patterns don't repeat themselves this cleanly by accident. It happened in places that were supposed to feel neutral. Lobbies, stores, waiting rooms. Restaurants where the lighting was warm and the staff trained to make everyone feel welcome. We would walk in together, side by side, sometimes holding hands, sometimes not. And still, their eyes went to her first. Not with hostility, not with curiosity exactly, with assessment. At a hotel check-in desk, the clerk smiled at me automatically, then paused when her eyes shifted to my partner. The smile adjusted slightly. Not disappearing, just recalibrating. "Can I see your ID?" the clerk asked her. My partner handed it over without comment. The clerk studied it longer than necessary, nodding slowly, then looked back at me. "And yours too, sir." We had made the reservation in my name. It was small, almost procedural, but I felt something tighten in my chest. Later in the elevator, my partner leaned against the wall, arms crossed loosely. "You saw that, right?" she asked. I did. She nodded. "It happens a lot." That was the thing. She didn't sound angry. She sounded practiced. Another time, we were browsing in a boutique. The salesperson approached us with a bright smile, greeting me first, asking what I was looking for, offering suggestions. My partner stood beside me, quiet. When she reached for an item, the salesperson turned toward her suddenly, the smile changing again. "Oh," she said. "Are you together?" My partner answered calmly. "Yes." The salesperson laughed lightly. "I just wanted to make sure." "Make sure of what?" We left shortly after. Outside, the afternoon felt heavier than it should have. "They always need to place me somewhere," my partner said as we walked, either as a question or as an exception. I thought about how often I moved through spaces without being noticed at all. How invisibility, in my case, felt like ease. For her, being seen came with weight. At a doctor's office, the receptionist addressed me while explaining forms, even though my partner was the patient. She corrected it gently, tapping the clipboard. "That's for me." The receptionist apologized quickly, embarrassed. "Sorry, I just assumed." She didn't finish the sentence. She never had to. In the waiting room, my partner scrolled through her phone, her posture relaxed but alert. I watched the way people glanced at her, then at me, then back again. Quick looks, calculations made and dismissed. "Does it bother you?" I asked quietly. She shrugged. "Some days more than others." "What bothers me," she continued after a moment, "is not the looking. It's what comes after. The way people adjust once they've decided what I am to them. That stuck with me, because I had seen it too. The shift. The subtle recalibration of tone, distance, authority. The way her presence changed the room without her saying a word. At a friend's birthday dinner, someone joked that she must be the strong one in the relationship. Everyone laughed. She smiled politely. Later, she said, "They didn't mean it badly, but they also didn't ask." Ask what? Who she actually was. Another evening, we were stopped by security at an event we'd been invited to. They checked her ticket twice. Mine once. "Just protocol," the guard said with a shrug. We didn't argue. We didn't make a scene. We stepped aside, waited, complied. On the way home, the car felt too quiet again. "I hate that it makes me second-guess myself," she said. "Like maybe I'm overreacting." "You're not," I replied immediately. She looked at me, searching my face. "How do you know?" "Because I see it happen," I said. "And because you notice it before I do." That earned a small smile. Over time, I realized something uncomfortable. I could choose when to notice these moments. She couldn't. They arrived uninvited, repeated, accumulating. At a coffee shop one morning, a man asked if she was waiting for someone. She gestured to me, standing right beside her. "Oh," he said, surprised. "I didn't realize." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm right here." He laughed awkwardly and walked away. She turned to me. It's always like that. They see me alone first. That night, as we lay in bed, I thought about how being seen could mean two very different things. For me, it often meant recognition. For her, it often meant scrutiny. "I don't want to disappear," she said softly. "I just want to exist without being measured." I reached for her hand. "You don't have to make yourself smaller." She squeezed my fingers. "I know, but sometimes the world pushes back when I don't. This story doesn't end with change. Not yet. People still look at her first. They still hesitate. They still adjust. But something else is happening too. She stopped apologizing for the space she takes up. And I've stopped pretending not to see what's right in front of me. The looks still come, but they no longer define the room. Because now, when people look at her first, they don't see uncertainty in her posture anymore. They see someone who knows exactly where she stands. And next time, we'll see what that changes. Everyone laughed. We didn't. It happened in the middle of a conversation that wasn't going anywhere important. The kind of talk that fills space rather than meaning. We were standing in a small circle at a friend's place, drinks in hand, listening more than speaking. Someone told a story about a work meeting that went sideways. There were impressions, exaggerated gestures, the familiar rhythm of a punchline coming. When the joke landed, it did so lightly, almost playfully. Everyone laughed. My partner smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I felt it before I fully understood it. The shift, subtle but unmistakable. The laughter around us continued for a second too long. It's just a joke, someone added quickly, noticing the brief pause. You know what I mean. That phrase again. Just a joke. I looked at my partner. She took a slow sip of her drink, buying herself time. I knew that look. The one where she decides whether it's worth opening a door that can't easily be closed. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. The conversation moved on, as it always did. Another story, another laugh. The moment was gone, technically, but it followed us the rest of the night, quiet and persistent. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past us. She rested her head against the window, her reflection faint in the glass. It wasn't even that bad, she said finally. I waited. That's what makes it exhausting, she continued. If it were obvious, it would be easier. You could point to it, name it, end it. I nodded. But because it's small, you're expected to swallow it, she finished. We sat with that for a moment. I thought about how humor often worked as a shield, how people hid behind it when they wanted to test a boundary without taking responsibility for crossing it. If anyone reacted, the fault shifted instantly. You're too sensitive. It's not that serious. I didn't mean it like that. I keep asking myself, she said quietly, why the burden of keeping things comfortable always lands on the same people. I didn't have an answer. A few weeks later, it happened again. Different group, same pattern. We were at a casual work happy hour. Loud enough that conversations overlapped. Quiet enough that you could still hear what mattered. Someone made a comment about preferences, framed as humor, wrapped in irony. People laughed again. This time, my partner didn't smile. The laughter slowed. Just a little. Someone noticed. Someone always does. I'm kidding, the person said, raising their hand slightly. Relax. My partner met their eyes. I am relaxed. The room shifted. No confrontation. No raised voices. Just a subtle recalibration of energy. The joke died where it stood. Later, as we stood outside waiting for a ride, she exhaled deeply. I didn't even explain, she said, sounding surprised at herself. You didn't need to, I replied. She nodded. That felt different. I realized then how often explanations were demanded from her, not to understand, but to neutralize, to turn discomfort back into something manageable for everyone else. At home, she kicked off her shoes and sat on the floor, back against the couch. I joined her. Do you ever feel like laughter is used as a test? She asked. Like, if you laugh too, you pass? Yes, I said. And if you don't, you fail, she finished. Or you become a problem. We sat there for a while, the quiet stretching comfortably between us. The next time it happened, it was smaller still. A passing comment at a grocery store. A quick remark followed by a grin. Barely anything at all. She didn't react. She didn't smile. She didn't explain. The person looked momentarily confused, then moved on. Later, she said, I'm learning that I don't owe anyone my laughter. That stayed with me, because laughter is often framed as generosity, as openness, as social glue. But I was starting to see how it could also be extracted, expected as payment for peace. This story doesn't end with people learning better jokes or suddenly understanding where the line is. It ends with something quieter. We still hear comments framed as humor. People still laugh too quickly. The room still waits to see how we'll respond. But now, we don't rush to smooth things over. Sometimes we let the joke sit where it landed. And sometimes, that silence says more than laughter ever could. Next time we'll see what happens when the joke isn't the only thing that falls flat. They asked again. As if the first answer hadn't been enough. It happened at a backyard gathering on a warm afternoon. Folding chairs, a grill smoking gently, conversations drifting in loose circles. The kind of place where people lean into ease and call it community. We had been invited by neighbors we liked, friendly, well-meaning, generous with smiles. Someone handed her a drink and asked casually, "So, where are you from?" She answered the way she always did. Clear, simple. "I grew up in Maryland." The questioner nodded, smiling. A beat passed. Then came the adjustment, the slight tilt of the head, the softer voice. "No, I mean, where are you really from?" I felt it before she spoke. That familiar pause. The one where she decides how much of herself to give to a moment that didn't earn it. She looked at the person steadily. "From here," she said. "Same as you." They laughed lightly, embarrassed. "You know what I mean?" She did. We both did. The conversation moved on, but the question stayed behind, hovering like a quiet demand. Explain yourself. Place yourself. Make it easier for us to understand you. Later, as we sat on the edge of the lawn, she said, "It's strange how people hear an answer and still feel entitled to another one." I nodded. As if the first one wasn't real enough. She shrugged. Or specific enough. I thought about how rarely anyone asked me that question. How my answers were accepted the first time, without translation or verification. How belonging for me was assumed. For her, it was negotiable. A few weeks later, it happened in a different setting. A work conference, polite introductions, name badges pinned neatly to jackets. Someone glanced at her name, then at her face. "That's a beautiful name," they said. "Is it African?" She smiled politely. "It's my grandmother's." The person nodded, then pressed on. "And where is your family originally from?" She answered again, calmly, patiently. When the question came a third time, I watched her posture shift, just slightly. A quiet tightening, like a door closing. Partway. "I'm American," she said. "That's the answer." The person laughed awkwardly. "Of course, I was just curious." Curiosity, I was learning, often masqueraded as innocence. On the way home, she was quiet. The city passed outside the car, familiar and distant all at once. "I don't mind talking about my history," she said finally. "I mind when my presence feels incomplete until I do." That sentence stayed with me, because it named something I had never needed to articulate. The idea that for some people, identity must be explained before it's accepted. That being here isn't always enough. Another time, we were waiting in line at a museum. A volunteer struck up a friendly conversation. "You're visiting?" she asked. "No," my partner replied. "We live nearby." "Oh," the woman said, surprised. "Really?" "Yes," she answered evenly. The woman smiled again, clearly flustered. "I just thought..." She didn't finish the thought. She didn't have to. Inside the museum, we moved quietly from exhibit to exhibit. At one point, my partner stopped in front of a display about migration and identity. She read the plaque slowly, then stepped back. "It's interesting," she said. "How much energy goes into deciding who belongs where?" I watched her face, thoughtful, composed, tired in a way that didn't show up in her posture. "Does it ever stop?" I asked. She considered the question. "Some days it feels like it does. Other days, It feels like it's built into the air. That night, as we sat on the couch, she leaned her head on my shoulder. "I don't want to be asked where I'm really from," she said quietly. "I want to be asked how I am." I wrapped an arm around her. "You deserve that." She smiled faintly. "I know. I just wish knowing it was enough." The next time someone asked, she didn't answer right away. She let the silence stretch, long enough for the question to hear itself. "I'm from here," she said finally, "and that's the whole story." The person nodded, uncertain what to do next. The conversation shifted. Something closed, not angrily, not dramatically, just firmly. This story doesn't end with the questions disappearing. They still come, sometimes gently, sometimes clumsily, sometimes wrapped in genuine interest. But now, she chooses which ones get answers. And I'm learning that belonging isn't proven by explaining your roots. It's claimed by standing where you are without apology. Next time, we'll see what happens when politeness becomes a boundary, and who notices when it does. No one crossed a line. That was the problem. It happened in a place where everything was supposed to feel correct, clean, professional, the kind of environment where people pride themselves on respect and order, where no one raises their voice and nothing improper is ever said out loud. We were attending a professional networking event. Neutral colors, soft lighting, name tags pinned just right, conversations that followed predictable paths, titles, roles, accomplishments. Everyone smiling with the same practiced ease. From the beginning, something felt off. Not hostile, not cold, just distant. People spoke to us politely, carefully, as if measuring every word before letting it leave their mouth. There was no warmth, but no rudeness either. Just a formality that felt heavier than it should have. When introductions were made, I noticed how quickly conversations drifted away from her. Not abruptly, just gradually, like water finding the path of least resistance. She would answer a question, clearly and confidently. A smile would follow. Then the person would turn slightly, addressing someone else. The exchange complete. "That was fast," she murmured at one point. I nodded. "You didn't even finish your sentence." She smiled faintly. I noticed. We stood together near a high table, drinks untouched. From where we were, we could see clusters forming and reforming, people leaning in, laughter rising and falling, connections being made. We weren't part of any of them. A man approached us briefly, introduced himself, asked what we did. He nodded thoughtfully, offered a polite comment, then excused himself within seconds. "Well," she said quietly. That was efficient. There was no offense in her tone, just observation. As the evening went on, the pattern repeated. People were kind, respectful, distant. No one said anything wrong. And yet, no one stayed. I began to understand what she meant when she once said that politeness could be exhausting. "It feels like I'm standing behind glass," she whispered as we watched another group form nearby. "They see me, they acknowledge me, but they don't let me in." I thought about how often I had mistaken politeness for inclusion, how easy it was to believe that being treated correctly meant being welcomed. "They're not rejecting you," I said slowly. "They're just not engaging." She nodded. "Exactly. And that's harder to name. Because how do you point to something that leaves no marks? How do you challenge a wall that smiles back at you?" Later, we joined a small group discussing a recent project. The conversation stayed surface level, safe, when she offered an insight. Sharp, thoughtful. It was met with polite nods. Then the topic shifted. No follow-up. No curiosity. I felt a flicker of frustration, not just on her behalf, but at myself, at how often I had benefited from those same spaces without questioning who they quietly excluded. On the drive home, the silence returned. It had become a familiar companion by then. "I used to think being polite was enough," she said finally. "Like, If I was kind, professional, easy to work with, the rest would follow. And now? I asked. Now I see that politeness can be a way of keeping things exactly as they are. That stayed with me. Weeks later, we found ourselves in a similar setting. Different people, same structure. This time, something shifted. When introductions were made, she didn't rush to soften herself. She spoke with the same calm confidence, but she didn't wait for permission to take up space. When a conversation began to drift away, she gently redirected it, asked a question, held eye contact. Not forcefully, not defensively, just present. Some people leaned in. Others still stepped back. But the difference was unmistakable. Afterward, she said, "I'm done mistaking distance for neutrality." I smiled. "That sounds like progress." She nodded. "It feels like it." This story doesn't end with walls disappearing. They're still there. Smooth, polite, hard to see until you press your hand against them. But now, we recognize them for what they are. And when politeness becomes a wall, we don't keep knocking. We choose where to stand instead. Next time, we'll see what happens when a compliment shifts the room, and who feels it first. The room shifted after the compliment. No one moved, but everyone felt it. It happened at a small celebration after work. Nothing formal, just a few tables pushed together, plates of food shared casually, music low enough to keep conversation close. People were relaxed, comfortable, that familiar ease that comes when no one expects anything difficult to surface. We arrived together, as we always did. She greeted people with the same quiet warmth that never tried to impress. I noticed, as I often did, how quickly eyes found her before settling elsewhere. At first, the evening moved smoothly. Stories passed back and forth. Laughter rose and fell. The room felt balanced, almost light. Then someone raised their glass. "I just want to say," they began, smiling, "you're really impressive. I mean, especially given where you come from." The words landed softly. Too softly. There was a pause. Not long enough to interrupt the moment, but long enough to bend it. I felt it in my chest before I understood it with my mind. My partner smiled politely. "Thank you," she said. The person nodded, clearly satisfied, unaware of what had just been placed in the center of the room. Conversation resumed, but the tone had shifted. Laughter sounded thinner. Comments became careful. She stood still, glass in hand, her posture relaxed but alert. I leaned closer. "Are you okay?" She nodded once. "I am," but I knew her well enough to hear what she didn't say. Later, as people moved into smaller conversations, someone approached her quietly. "I hope that didn't come out wrong," they whispered. "It was meant as a compliment." She met their eyes. "I know." And that was all. Outside, the air felt cooler. We walked slowly toward the car, neither of us rushing to speak. "That's the thing about compliments like that," she said finally. "They sound like praise, but they come with conditions." I nodded. "As if success needs an explanation. As if it's unexpected," she added, "and needs to be framed that way." I thought about how many compliments I had received in my life, without a backstory attached. How rarely anyone needed to qualify my achievements. A few days later, it happened again. Different context, same pattern. This time, it was someone praising her confidence. "You carry yourself so well," they said. "Some people just aren't built for spaces like this." She smiled faintly. "Which people?" The question wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. The person laughed awkwardly. "You know what I mean." She did. We both did. The room shifted again. Subtle. Almost invisible. But unmistakable. On the way home, she rested her head back against the seat. "Do you ever notice how compliments can also be corrections?" "Yes," I said. "Like they're saying, 'You're doing better than expected.'" She smiled sadly. "Exactly." That night, we sat on the couch in silence. The kind that doesn't demand filling. Eventually, she spoke. I'm tired of being measured against expectations I didn't create. I reached for her hand. You shouldn't have to be. She squeezed my fingers. I know, but knowing it and feeling it are different. The next time it happened, something changed. We were at another gathering. Someone complimented her again, this time on her intelligence, her clarity, her presence. The sentence started the same way it always did. She listened, let the words finish. Then she said calmly, "Thank you." I worked hard for it. No qualifiers, no explanations, no softening. The room stayed still for a moment. Then conversation resumed. Later, she smiled at me. "Did you feel that?" I did. "It didn't shrink the room," she said. "It just reset it." This story doesn't end with people learning how to compliment better. It ends with something quieter. She no longer carries compliments like fragile objects. She receives them, or leaves them, on her own terms. And I'm learning that sometimes the most powerful response isn't correction or gratitude. It's presence. Next time we'll see what happens when we don't argue at all, and why that can be the hardest choice. We didn't argue. That was what stayed with me. It happened after an evening that looked, from the outside, entirely successful. We had gone to an event, spoken to people, smiled at the right moments, said nothing that could be quoted later as a problem. If someone asked how it went, we could have easily said, "It was fine," and that would have been true. Technically. On the drive home, the city passed quietly around us. Traffic lights changed. Music played softly on the radio. Everything moved forward as it should. Neither of us spoke. I kept waiting for the moment when she would say something, name the discomfort, unpack the small moments that had stacked on top of each other throughout the night. She didn't. And for the first time, I realized how much I depended on that conversation to reassure myself that what we felt was real. At home, we moved through our routine with practiced ease. Shoes by the door, keys on the counter, a glass of water before bed. Familiar motions that usually grounded us. That night, they didn't. She sat at the edge of the couch, scrolling on her phone without really reading. I sat beside her, unsure where to place my hands, my words. "Do you want to talk about tonight?" I asked finally. She hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. "I don't think so," she said. "Not right now." I nodded, trying not to read into it, but something in her tone wasn't closed. It was tired. Later, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying moments from the evening. The questions that lingered too long. The jokes that landed awkwardly. The compliments that came with invisible footnotes. We had noticed all of it. Together. And yet, we hadn't argued. We hadn't even disagreed. The next morning, the quiet followed us into daylight. Breakfast was calm, ordinary. She asked about my meetings. I asked about hers. We moved around each other gently, like people sharing space rather than inhabiting it together. It wasn't distance. It was suspension. That afternoon, she texted me from work. "I keep thinking about last night." I replied almost immediately, "Me too." There was a pause before her next message. I didn't want to argue about it. That sentence explained more than I expected. When we saw each other later, she said it out loud. "Sometimes, I don't want to turn everything into a conversation. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it does." I waited. "When we argue," she continued, "it becomes about words, tone, who said what, and I get tired of defending a feeling that already took so much energy to hold." I understood then that the absence of argument wasn't avoidance. It was self-preservation. "I didn't want to explain myself," she said. "Not even to you. I just wanted the feeling to exist without being processed." I nodded slowly. "I think I needed the argument more than you did." She smiled faintly. "That's because you're trying to make sense of it. I'm trying to survive it." That hit me harder than I expected. I had always seen conversation as resolution, as movement, as progress. But for her, silence sometimes meant rest. A few days later, we were invited somewhere else. Different people, same dynamics. We navigated it smoothly, almost effortlessly. We were practiced by then. On the way home, I waited again. This time, I didn't rush the silence. After a while, she spoke. I noticed everything. So did I said. I don't want to talk about it, she added. But I'm glad you were there. That was enough. I realized then that not arguing didn't mean we weren't aligned. It meant we trusted each other enough not to perform understanding every time something hurt. This story doesn't end with clarity or closure. It ends with something subtler. We didn't argue. We didn't resolve. We didn't name every feeling. And somehow we felt closer. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't speaking up or pushing back. It's allowing space for pain without turning it into a debate. Next time, we'll see what happens when we stop explaining ourselves entirely, and what that costs and gives in return. Nothing dramatic happened. We just stopped explaining. It wasn't a decision we announced out loud. There was no conversation where we sat across from each other and agreed on a new rule. It happened quietly, the way most real changes do. One moment at a time. One pause at a time. We were at a small gathering, nothing special. A few people we knew, a few we didn't. The kind of place where introductions are made quickly and forgotten just as fast. Someone asked what we did for work. We answered. Someone asked how long we'd been together. We answered that too. Then came the familiar shift. A comment that hovered too long. A smile that tried to smooth something over before it was even acknowledged. A question that didn't quite know how to end. This time, neither of us filled the space. She looked at me briefly, not for permission, but for recognition. I nodded. That was enough. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortably, just long enough to make the moment belong to the person who created it. Eventually, the conversation moved on. Later, someone else tried again. A comment framed as curiosity. Another opportunity to clarify, soften, reassure. To explain who we were in a way that made it easier for everyone else. We didn't. Not out of defiance, not out of anger, but because we were tired of translating something that wasn't unclear to begin with. On the drive home, the city lights reflected softly across the windshield. She leaned back in her seat, quiet. That felt different, she said. How so? I asked. I didn't feel smaller afterward. I thought about that, about how often explanations had cost her something. Energy, comfort, patience, without ever guaranteeing understanding. I think we've been doing a lot of invisible labor, I said. She smiled faintly. I think I'm done with it. The next few weeks confirmed it. At work events, she answered questions directly, without extra context. When conversations drifted toward assumptions, she didn't rush to correct them. She let people sit with what they'd said. Some adjusted, some didn't. Invitations changed. Dynamics shifted. A few people became distant. Others surprised us by leaning in, asking better questions, listening without needing reassurance. And some simply disappeared from our orbit. That was the hardest part. Not the confrontation we never had, but the quiet realization of how much access had been conditional on our willingness to explain ourselves. One evening, as we sat on the couch, she said something that stayed with me. I used to think explaining was how you built bridges. Now I see it can also be how you keep people comfortable enough not to cross them. I nodded. And stopping doesn't mean closing off. It just means choosing where to invest, she said. I watched her as she spoke, calm, grounded, no longer bracing for impact. The world around us hadn't suddenly changed. People still smiled, still asked questions, still made assumptions. But something in us had. We were no longer moving through spaces hoping to be understood. We were moving through them knowing who we were. And that changed how everything felt. This story doesn't end with triumph. There's no neat resolution. No moment where society catches up or everyone suddenly learns the right words. It ends with a quieter kind of certainty. We stopped explaining ourselves. And in doing so, we stopped waiting for permission to belong. The looks still come, the pauses still happen, the questions still surface. But now they don't follow us home. Because when you stop explaining who you are, you begin to hear something else instead. Your own voice, steady and clear, telling you that you were never unclear to begin with. And maybe that's where the next chapter starts. Maybe you've never lived any of this. Or maybe you have, and you just never named it. Maybe you've been the one explaining yourself, choosing words carefully, smiling at the right moments, making things easier so the room could stay comfortable. Or maybe you've been standing beside someone who does, watching the weight settle on them, not always knowing when to speak, or when silence was the only thing that felt honest. These moments don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with warnings or clear edges. They pass quietly, wrapped in politeness, hidden in pauses, smiles, and questions that seem harmless. And once you start noticing them, they don't disappear. They wait. What you do next, what you carry home, what you let go of, what you stop explaining, that's where your own story begins.